The Galactic Concord, a sprawling alliance of hundreds of sentient species, prided itself on its enlightened understanding of the cosmos. Its vast libraries held the accumulated knowledge of millennia, cross-referenced and meticulously catalogued. Among these archives, humanity was filed under emergent species, Sol III origin. Noteworthy for rapid technological advancement, high internal diversity, and a peculiar penchant for elaborate, often contradictory, fictional narratives. Human stories, their myths, legends, and particularly their vast troves of what they called fiction, were a source of mild amusement and anthropological curiosity for most conquered scholars. The more pragmatic species found them inefficient, a wasteful expenditure of cognitive resources. Others saw them as charming, if naive, attempts by a young race to make sense of a universe they barely understood. Human horror, with its grotesque monsters and tales of cosmic dread, was generally dismissed as the product of overactive imaginations, a harmless way for a species still tethered to primal fears to process anxiety. Fanciful nonsense was the prevailing, if politely unstated, consensus. This gentle dismissal persisted until the arrival of the Shadow Blight. It began at the galaxy's edge, a creeping null zone that absorbed light, energy, and eventually matter. Probes sent to investigate vanished without a trace. Long-range scans returned only impossible readings. Pockets of space where known physics seemed to fray, where dimensions twisted in upon themselves. Worlds unfortunate enough to be in its path didn't just die. They were unmade, their inhabitants succumbing to a creeping madness before vanishing utterly. The Conquered, for all its combined knowledge and power, was baffled and terrified. Their most advanced weapons were useless, their greatest scientific minds unable to offer any explanation, let alone a defense. Desperation began to set in. Lyra, a Xylan archivist of the Third Order, felt this desperation keenly. The Xylans were a species of crystalline beings, their thought processes as ordered and precise as their physical forms. Lyra's designated task was to sift through low-priority cultural data streams from younger, less developed member species, a polite way of saying she was looking for needles in galactic-sized haystacks, a task most considered utterly futile. The Conquered High Council, in its growing panic, had ordered every archive, no matter how obscure, to be re-examined for any possible insight into the Shadow Blight. Lyra found herself immersed in the Terran Creative Database. The sheer volume was overwhelming, trillions of files, music, visual arts, and endless stories. She sampled a few, finding them, as expected, illogical and emotionally driven. She skimmed through adventure tales, romances, and then, with a sigh of weary duty, she opened the horror subdirectory. The descriptions alone were absurd. Tentacled things from beyond the stars, cities of impossible geometry, whispers that eroded sanity. Primitive fear-mongering, she thought, cataloging a file titled The Call of Cthulhu by a human named Lovecraft as archaic dread narrative, low relevance. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of data ingestion and dismissal. The Shadow Blight continued its inexorable advance. News from the affected sectors grew more harrowing. Reports spoke of victims babbling about angles that were wrong, of colors that hurt the mind, of a vast, uncaring intelligence at the heart of the Blight. One particularly bleak day cycle, Lyra, seeking a distraction from the grim official reports, idly clicked on a human file labeled SCP Foundation Containment Procedures. It seemed to be a collaborative fiction project, a database of anomalous objects and entities. She read an entry about a statue that moved when unobserved, another about a staircase that descended endlessly, its explorers lost to madness. Childish, she murmured, yet a strange unease prickled at the edges of her crystalline consciousness. Then she came across an entry describing an extra-dimensional entity whose mere perception could induce acute psychological distress, whose presence warped local reality, and whose motives were utterly alien and unknowable. The description of the sensory distortions, the creeping paranoia, the feeling of cosmic insignificance. It was disturbingly similar to the fragmented, often incoherent, testimonies of survivors from worlds brushed by the Shadow Blight. Lyra paused, her internal light patterns flickering with uncharacteristic agitation. Coincidence, surely. A young species, prone to wild imaginings, had accidentally brushed against concepts that sophisticated astrophysicists were only now grappling with. She tried to dismiss it, to return to her logical Xylan mindset, but the seed of doubt had been planted. She returned to the Lovecraft file. She read of great old ones, beings of immense power from beyond the known universe, sleeping, waiting. She read of Arlai, a sunken city of nightmare corpsity geometry, whose emergence would herald an age of madness and chaos. She cross-referenced the descriptions with the latest astronomical data from the Blight's Edge. The Concord's deep space arrays had detected anomalies, gravitational distortions that hinted at structures that defied Euclidean geometry. Her core processors, usually so calm and orderly, began to race. She pulled up other human horror stories, tales of elder things, of color out of space, of entities that existed in planes beyond human comprehension. She found a story about a play whose performance brought madness and despair. She found tales of beings whose forms were so alien they could not be described, only hinted at through the madness they induced in those who glimpsed them. The more she read, the more a terrifying pattern emerged. These weren't just random nightmares. The descriptions, the concepts, the very essence of the cosmic dread these human fictions evoked mirrored the encroaching reality of the shadow blight with an accuracy that was statistically impossible. The non-Euclidean geometries, the sanity-shattering emanations, the sense of ancient, malevolent, and utterly indifferent cosmic powers. It was all there, laid out in the fanciful nonsense of a species the Concord had barely considered significant. The oh shit moment, as humans might term it, arrived when Lyra stumbled upon a fragmented precursor text, one of the few surviving records from a long-dead civilization that had faced a similar threat millennia ago. The precursor text was cryptic, filled with dire warnings about the sleeper in the deep, the crawling chaos, and the unnameable. These terms had always puzzled Concord linguists, but now, cross-referencing them with human mythology and horror fiction, Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep, Haster. The names, the descriptions, the roles these entities played in human narratives aligned with the precursor warnings to a horrifying degree. Humanity hadn't invented these monsters. They remembered them. Lyra, her crystalline structure vibrating with a sensation akin to human fear, compiled her findings. It was the most illogical report she had ever prepared. Her superiors, when she presented it, were initially dismissive, almost insulted. Archivist Lyra, High Counselor Vorin, a being of pure energy, pulsed with disapproval. Are you suggesting that the key to understanding a galaxy-threatening phenomenon lies in the campfire stories of Homo sapiens? Counselor, Lyra projected, her usual calm strained, I am suggesting that human fiction, particularly their genre of cosmic horror, is not fiction at all. It is a form of ancestral memory, a deeply embedded, psychically inherited record of past encounters with threats like the Shadow Blight. Their imagination, as they call it, is a defense mechanism, a way of processing and storing truths too terrible for their conscious minds to bear directly. She displayed the correlations, passages from human texts alongside telemetry from the Blight, linguistic parallels between precursor warnings and human mythos. She showed them how human descriptions of certain fictional entities matched, with chilling precision, the bizarre effects and rare, distorted glimpses of what lay within the Shadow Blight. Silence descended upon the High Council chamber. The beings present, representing species that had charted stars and debated philosophy for eons, were confronted with a truth so outlandish, so contrary to their understanding of the universe, that it bordered on the obscene. One by one, as Lyra presented more evidence, ancient human artwork depicting tentacled beings found in archaeological digs, folklore from isolated human cultures describing star-spawned horrors, even analyses of human brain activity during nightmares showing patterns that resonated with energy signatures detected near the Blight, disbelief slowly gave way to a dawning, horrified awe. The implications were staggering. Humanity was not a young, naive species stumbling blindly through the cosmos. They were, in some fundamental way, ancient. They were carriers of a terrible legacy, their minds a living archive of cosmic horrors, their nightmares a library of existential threats. Their fiction was a coded language, a Rosetta Stone for the unspeakable. The Concord's approach to the Shadow Blight and to humanity changed almost overnight. Human artists, their writers of horror and dark fantasy, their illustrators of the grotesque, even their designers of particularly terrifying video games, were no longer seen as mere entertainers. They were summoned, consulted with a mixture of urgency and trepidation. Their works were not read for leisure, but dissected as critical intelligence documents. Linguists, xenopsychologists, and military strategists pored over dusty paperbacks and flickering digital files from Earth, searching for clues, for weaknesses, for anything that might help them understand and combat the blight. Earth's creative archives, once a triviality, became the most heavily guarded and intensely studied databases in the galaxy. Teams of Xylan archivists, led by a now deeply respected Lyra, worked alongside human scholars, translating the metaphorical language of nightmares into actionable intelligence. They learned of rituals, of symbols, of specific vulnerabilities hinted at in the terrifying tales. The Shadow Blight was still a monstrous threat, but it was no longer entirely unknown. Humanity, through its fanciful nonsense, had provided a chillingly accurate bestiary of the abyss, a user manual for cosmic dread. A new phrase began to circulate through the star lanes, whispered in awe and unease. Listen to the human nightmares. Humanity standing in the galactic Concord was irrevocably altered. They were no longer just another young race. They were the keepers of the dark, the dreamers of dread, their minds a conduit to the terrifying truths that lurked in the spaces between the stars. And the rest of the galaxy, which had once pitied or dismissed their vivid imaginations, now looked upon them with a new, profound, and deeply unsettling respect. For in the heart of human fear, they had found an unexpected, and perhaps their only, hope. Lyra often found herself revisiting those early human horror texts, no longer with disdain, but with a chilling reverence. She understood now. Humanity did not create these horrors. They had merely been the first to look into the abyss, and the abyss, in its terrible wisdom, had looked back, leaving its indelible, nightmarish imprint upon their collective soul. And through their stories, humanity had unknowingly been warning the galaxy all along.